This cordyline is in a right state, and what you can see here is a result of a mistake that I've made in the garden. I bought this as a very young plant about 4 or 5 years ago for about £3. I think it was about a foot tall, and I've planted it in the wrong place. So years later it grew humongously, it outgrew its space and it needed to be moved. The problem with these plants is once they get to a certain size, they don't like being moved. They send lots and lots of roots everywhere, and once they're disturbed and the big plants, they tend to really suck and lose a lot of leaves. In fact, on this one, the majority of leaves on the plant have dried out, and you can see this where I've cut back all these leaves at the bottom of the plant. Now normally with the cordyline plant, they're always going to lose leaves at the bottom of the plant, and that's how you get the trunk. But this is going brown all over, including at the top of the plant. So you can see it starts off with this brown edging and it works its way down to the bottom until the entire leaf is brown. Now I've seen this at other times after bad frost damage, and I've learned from experience is that it just dies a slow death. It's just not worth keeping hold of the plant. So unfortunately I'm going to pull this out, and it's going to be a loss for the garden. So that's one lesson I've learned with a lot of plants in the garden. Put them in a place where you don't need to move them, particularly if they're going to grow into a big shrub. Now it can be tempting to actually put a plant somewhere where there's not enough space because you like the way it looks at that particular time, but eventually the plant will have to be moved. Last year I didn't mulch the garden at all, and it was absolutely full of weeds. I was pulling them out all summer. So this year I've barked the entire garden, and there's definitely less weeds around. Now this is a mistake that many people make. You do need to mulch your garden to keep the weeds down. And it's strange, if you see a lot of gardens in the neighbourhood, not many people go to the trouble of doing it, and you see them out there in the front garden all summer long pulling weeds out of the ground. Now I made a mistake here because I didn't clear this of weeds properly. I had some crocus bulbs that were flowering when I put the bark down, and I didn't really bark over it properly, and as a result I can see grass coming through, perennial weeds coming through. So you do need to make sure that you bark thoroughly or mulch thoroughly to keep these weeds down. I love Agastaki or hummingbird mint. Now I've killed quite a few of these over the years, and the mistake that I make is I never have the soil well drained enough. When you read the label, it will tell you that it likes a very well drained soil, but sometimes you can actually forget what that actually means. Now if you go to the Mediterranean or to a semi-arid location, you'll see how dry the soil gets in these places. It's bone dry, and this comes from Mexico. As you can imagine, certain parts of Mexico, it does get very dry. Now these are frost tolerant because in some desert-like locations or high up in mountains it can get quite cold, but they just don't get the amount of rain that we get in this country. I mean, this will do fine in the summer, but once you get to those lower temperatures, you get through those winter rains, the soil can get really compacted and wet. So that's the mistake I've made with these, making sure that the soil is dry and sharp draining. This one seems to be okay now, because it's right on the edge of this border. So I've learnt me lesson with regards to that. With quite a few plants in the garden, always make sure that if it likes it really well drained, it's really well drained. I've learnt another lesson this year about this Loropetalum. Now, I've had this a couple of years now, and last year I kept it in a sheltered location away from the winter frosts, and it was fine. It was fine come the spring. But this winter, we had a really mild winter, and I left it out all the way through. Hardly any frost at all. But there's another problem that you can have with this shrub. It doesn't like the wind, and these leaves and these stems are really quite brittle. So this winter we had quite a few storms, quite a few heavy winds, and come spring, before these new leaves come out, this was completely battered. There was leaves all over the floor, snapped branches, and there's a lot of leaf scorch. Now, if you read up about this plant, it will tell you that you do need to keep it in a sheltered position. It's not even about the cold, it's about the fact that certain plants, they don't like to be in windy locations. Acer is the classic example of a plant that doesn't really like to be exposed to a lot of wind, because they get this leaf scorch. Now, it's a lesson learned, and it was a mistake. I won't take that for granted next year if we have a mild winter. It does need to be kept sheltered during the winter, or in like very windy conditions, particularly if I'm looking to keep this in this pot. Of course, the good thing about having it in a pot is I can move it out of the way when need be. So that's another lesson learned. If a plant doesn't like the wind, keep it out of a windy location. Now, sometimes with these things, you read this up on the plant label and you just decide, well, I want it in this spot, I'll just plant it there anyway and see how it gets on. But the problem is, if you ignore stuff like that, you end up regretting it. When I first moved into this house, I thought to myself, I'll get some fruit trees, I've got the space. So I went on the website and I found that you could buy peach trees, because they were winter hardy. Now, the thing with peach trees, you don't see many of them in this country. In fact, you rarely see them in this country. There's a very good reason for that. These trees hate the winter wet, and this is what happens in the spring, early summer. You get these curled up leaves. Now, this is a disease called peach leaf curl, and unless you keep this tree dry all through the winter, there's no escape. It's always going to come back. I do get peaches, but there's not a lot of them. Now, what will happen is I'll have to pick a lot of these bad leaves off the tree, and then they'll be replaced with nice fresh new ones, and the plants will look good for quite a few months, until next spring, after it's overwintered. You'll get the fresh crop of new leaves, and we'll have the same problem. So I do love this plant, and I do get some peaches from it, but I think overall it was a mistake to plant it. And I've learned a lesson from this. If you think a plant is going to be disease prone in your area, just don't bother. You're causing yourself a load of hassle. Now, around the corner from here, there was a nice red robin hedge. And I thought to myself, I wouldn't mind having a red robin or a photina in my garden. Now the photina is another plant that is prone to leaf spot or diseases. So I bought 2 of them, £20 each, planted them. They had nice red leaves on them, and then within a year they were falling off the tree with black blotches all over the leaves. And the hedge round the corner had the same problem, completely lost its leaves. And I read later you tend to find that in industrial planting schemes they don't use these red robin shrubs a lot these days because of the problem with the leaf spot. So I've learned that if you look around your area, if you see a particular plant and it's full of disease and you want that plant, you just best not go into the hassle. Just stick to plants that are disease resistant and trouble free. Saves a lot of time in the long run. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.